were you going to say?
Yeah. I've been wondering how books of the Bible were selected. I don't know if you've had that thought.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, what's were the measures they put in place? Who were the people or the person who sat down and selected, okay, Matthew, Mark, Luke, John, Acts, Romans, First Corinthians, Second Corinthians would be part of the Bible? I mean, the 66 books of the Old and New Testaments.
Oh man, I need water.
Oh, you didn't come with yours?
That's a good reminder. I forgot the jug completely. But sorry, I interrupted you. Yeah, no, I think I understand your question. Sorry. It's one of those things. I know that when I started, and I've got to put, I know I want to put more time into it, but it is so important because the foundation of our faith is in Scripture, right? And in the 66 books of the Bible, right? That's as we as Orthodox Christians, evangelicals, and we say there's 66 authoritative books, right? The Old Testament was authoritatively given by the prophets, starting with Moses. I mean, possibly Joseph. There's some people who say that. And the Old Testament Hebrew canon was solidified before the time of Christ, right? So that when you get to the time of the New Testament, the Old Testament canon is fixed, right? It's not being added to anymore. They already had an understanding. If you read extra biblical literature, from some of the Hebrew traditions of that time, you'll see that they understood it as fixed. Probably came right after the time of Ezra and Nehemiah, right? And I think Ezra had a role in copying, kind of he was a high priest, but it also seems, I think he had a significant role in the copying of the text and probably also the canonization of the Old Testament. It would make sense, right? They're coming out of Babylon. They're noticing the repeated problems of these Israelites not understanding the law. So it's time to put it together, canonize it, and have people regularly instructed in it. That's the Old Testament. That was sealed, solidified. There's not really any debate there. It's the New Testament where things get a little messy, and there's kind of three broad criteria. The one is the author of a New Testament book has to be a witness or have known a living witness of the events of Jesus' life, right? So when it comes to the gospel,
more like by connection.
Yes, direct connection.
Okay.
It can't be like I knew him who knew him who knew him, right? It was recognized in the early church that for a letter or a book to be authoritative, it had to come from a recognized apostle, or it had to come from somebody who was directly under their teaching. And so rather than there being like a centralized, again, this is the Roman Catholic position, right? Because they would say it's a centralized, it was the church that gives us the Bible, a centralized institution, right? In the 3rd century AD, dealing with the Marcionite heresy, right? In response to that, he has formed his Gnostic gospel or New Testament, right? Getting rid of certain books and saying they're not scripture. So, the church had to come in and say, okay, these are scripture and these are not. So it's a decision of the church. The church gives us the Bible. That's the Roman Catholic argument. And I'm not going to deny that, of course, the councils that are held in the 3rd century and the church coming together and saying, okay, these are scripture and these are not, didn't have a role in giving us now the formalized canon that we have. Of course, that's significant. But we have to remember that it is the Spirit of God that testifies Scripture to being Scripture. And the Spirit of God speaks through Scripture clearly. And even in Scripture consistently, you have this in the Old Testament, you have this in the New Testament. The authors are recognizing their own authority. They're recognizing themselves as the voice piece of God. They're asserting that quite often in their letters. Think of Paul, right? I, Paul, an apostle of God, right? They're speaking with authority. They're speaking assertively. Okay, this is what God says. And when Paul's knows it's not what God says, like on the issue of marriage, he says, I wish, right? And not I wish exactly, but right, he makes it crystal clear, this is my opinion.
Right.
If only some of you were like me. But I know, of course, that this isn't how God has made man. And he makes those qualifiers. They recognize it, and as those letters go out, because it's going to take time, right? And they go to the churches, they're circulating amongst the churches, and the churches recognize them as authoritative. Right? Really, when it came down to who the church, right, in the 3rd century actually said, okay, this is canon and this is not, they're looking at what the church has for the last 2.5 centuries already been practicing, right? What they've already accepted as the books, right? And so I'm a firm believer that all the books of the New Testament were not only all written prior to 70 AD, right, the destruction of Jerusalem and such, but they were all recognized as authoritative before the end of the 1st century, right? It's not until the 3rd century that now it's canonized and put together and said, these are the scriptures and these are not. But the church had already recognized which are scripture and which are not. And some of those gospels, like Thomas's gospel, right, and such, they're Gnostic. Let's be really clear. You can read through them and you can see some extremely chaotic things. I forget which one, right? But there's the example that, women are, it was very clear, women are lesser, right? It's this pagan idea. Women are chaos. It's very clear, right? What women would have to do to enter heaven. It's a separate thing. So in these other gospels, they're not circulating. They're not circulating throughout all the churches at the time. They're not recognized as authoritative by the churches at the time, right? They're recognized that they're not actually written by an apostle or an eyewitness. So that when it comes to finally, they actually decide these are the ones that are in and these are the ones that are out, that's just what the church has already been practicing for 200 plus years.